Aruna woke up that day with a slight temperature and she wasn't really feeling comfortable. So her niece suggested her to take a leave and rest. After all, she was a very hardworking nurse and she deserved a day off. But against her niece's advice, Aruna still went for work. Little did the niece know that this would be the last normal conversation she was going to have with her aunt. Because what happened next, nobody, and I mean nobody, would imagined could have happened. Aruna was born in 1948 in Haldipur town of Shimoga, Karnataka. She was working in King Edward Memorial Hospital in Parel, Mumbai at that time. She was just 25 years of age, right? And she was a junior nurse. Her life trajectory was set pretty good. She was engaged to a fellow medico and was soon to get married the same year. But everything fell apart on the fateful day of 27th November 1973. During the shift, while she went to change her clothes in the basement, a fellow ward boy noticed her and saw his opportunity and he proceeded to assault her. Now, fair warning, the details are pretty gruesome. On that day, during her shift break, Aruna went all alone to change her clothes in the basement. That's when Sohan Lal Bartha Valmiki, who was a fellow ward boy in the same hospital, noticed her and took his opportunity. He went on to hit her with a metal dog chain and also strangulate her, leading to her being unconscious, and then proceeded to sodomize her. Now, basically, sodomization is having an intercourse through the anus, which was so terrible that she was left bleeding through her anus for multiple days. Now, relevant to this case, one of the most important things is that strangulation, because after that, Sohanal just left her to die. So, what basically happened was during the strangulation, her brain was left without oxygen for way too long. And brain, my dear friends, is the most sensitive organ to hypoxia in our body. Only 10 minutes worth of hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen, can lead to complete irreversible brain damage, which by then the chances of survival are bare minimum. And that's what happened to Aruna Shanbaug. She had a brainstem contusion injury. She had a cervical cord injury, which left her partially blind, and immediately she went into coma. Plus, obviously, the criminal had left her to die, but fortunately, she was found the next day in the morning by some other clerk. By then, it was way too late, and she had already been into a coma. Next day, the family got a call from the hospital stating that Aruna had been attacked. See, when Aruna did not return that night, the family wasn't really afraid because she was a medical health professional and she was 25 years of age. It was pretty normal for them. But that phone call next day changed everything. Sohan Lal was caught and eventually charged with robbery and assault. He served 2 concurrent 7-year sentences from 1973 to 1980 and he was finally released. But here's a very weird thing or very bizarre thing here is he wasn't charged with which would have easily led him to a life imprisonment sentence. Primarily, the hospital staff wanted to keep it a secret about the that had happened because they wanted to save the upcoming marriage that Aruna had. Little did they know that she was not going to wake up from the long slumber she had just fell into. Now, here's one of the most important things that I want to talk here is what Aruna's condition was. And that's why I would like to call Medico Harish to explain it, because then only we can proceed further in this case. First of all, we all need to understand that both persistent vegetative state and coma are conditions referring to the patient being unconscious and unaware of their surroundings or their environment, and which may sound similar, but these conditions are very drastically different. See, in coma, there is no wakefulness or any sleep-wake cycle. The eyes are always closed, no or minimal response to stimuli. The brain function is variable or depressed, which is the most important thing here. Duration is also variable depending on the type and severity of the injury. It can be either very short or very long. But usually the patients in coma may recover or they can even transition into persistent vegetative state. Now, persistent vegetative state, seemingly there are a lot of better things that are happening because most of the important thing here is that brainstem function is either slightly there or is intact. Because of that, there is a proper sleep-wake cycle present. Even though the patient does not have any awareness of their surroundings, but they still have some involuntary reflexes there because of the intact brainstem and the spinal cord function. But even all these seeming improvements, PVS is a lot much more worse condition than coma. Mostly because it's a term coined to tell people that their condition is very rough. Because PVS is diagnosed very late into an unconscious state. Like if they were in unconscious state for over probably few months, there's a whole criteria you can study. So after that, PVS is set. And the recovery potential is almost zero. The best case scenario here that could happen is a transition to MCS. Now, an MCS is minimally conscious state, which is characterized by inconsistent but clearly discernible behavioral evidence of consciousness. That means the patient can feel he's conscious. There are certain behavioral improvements that you could feel, but still he's not fully aware or can move on his own or he's independent. But it is enough for it to distinguish from coma and the vegetative state. Considering the condition, the brainstem function mostly is intact in persistent vegetative states. Because of that, the sleep-wake cycle is there, and also other essential physiological mechanisms also work, like breathing. So the patient, even though he's completely unconscious, patients can breathe on their own without machines. They would be needed to be fed, obviously, because they can't move or they can't eat on their own. This intactness of brainstem is very important because this also assures that the eyes can be opened and closed. There can be some vocalization happening, some reflexes of movements. But rest assured, it all would be involuntary because obviously the brain injury, the brain damage in the cortical areas would be so much that it's almost non-functional. And in the case of Aruna Shanbuag, she went into a coma initially, which later transitioned into a persistent vegetative state for 42 years until her death. Now, back to the case we go. It's not only about this one long slumber of 42 years in which Aruna Shanbaug was in, and I've just made a case study about that, but there was a twist. Around 1998, Pinky Virani got acquainted with Aruna Shanbaug. Now, those who don't know, Pinky Virani is a very acclaimed author. She had written multiple books. She's also a human rights activist. She has also won a national award for one of her books. So she came to know about this case and she wrote a book about it as well called Aruna's Story. Now, this didn't end here. Pinky Virani was very concerned about Aruna's story and what this represented. Now, it highly depends on which side you're on, judging like what Pinky Virani's motives here were, because the hospital staff clearly thought differently, but we'll talk about that in detail later. But around 2010, she took a very big step in late 2010 that changed everything. See, Aruna was in a persistent vegetative state, obviously, which Medico Harish clarified. And her condition wasn't improving by over these years. Actually, it was getting worse. Plus, it wasn't really looking like she was going to improve. So, Pinky Virani, looking at Aruna, she decides to file a petition on 17th December 2010, filing for ending the life of Aruna Shanbaug. See, according to Pinky Virani, Aruna Shanbaug was in PVS for over 36 years and was virtually a dead person. She wanted the court to issue instructions to forthwith ensure that no food is fed. But the hospital authorities had different story. They said that Miss Shanbaug accepts food in normal course and responds by facial expressions and responds to commands intermittently by making sound, which with the help of Medico Harish, we've already known that these things happen involuntarily during persistent vegetative state. Now, it goes on further. On 24 January 2011, a 3-member medical panel was established under the Honorable Supreme Court's directive. After examining Shanbaug, the panel concluded that she met most of the criteria of being in a permanent vegetative state. Again, on 7th March 2011, the Honorable Supreme Court, in a landmark judgment, issued a set of guidelines legalizing passive euthanasia. Wait. But what is euthanasia? I think we got to go back to Medico Harish. Welcome again. Let's discuss about euthanasia. Now, it's basically a practice of mercy killing. It's intentionally ending a person's life to alleviate suffering, particularly in cases of terminal illness or severe pain. It's basically done when there is a terminally ill person and his or her condition is not going to improve anytime soon, so they just decide to end his or her life. Now, there is some problem in this. It might seem very great thing, but there are certain peculiarities that we need to discuss. Legally speaking, there are two types of euthanasia, active and passive. And by the names, they definitely will give you some hint of what they mean. Active euthanasia means actively killing a person. See, it's legal in very few countries, but it involves direct actions which ends someone's life, like administering lethal drugs. That's why its legality is debatable and very few countries consider it. Whereas passive euthanasia, on the other hand, is simply doing nothing. Basically means withholding or withdrawing treatment necessary for sustaining life. So it basically says if that person is actually so much ill that he can't even do the most bare minimum for survival, then it's better to remove the machine help that he or she has to perform these basic life. These ventilators are turned off, and if the patient is not even able to breathe, passively he dies. This form is more widely accepted, and more countries have legalized it under obviously very special and specific circumstances. So here the point is that Aruna Shanbaug, she was in a persistent vegetative state, which I discussed when I came in last time. Do you guys remember that? Okay, the thing is, her brainstem functions were intact, so her essential physiological functions were intact as well. So without the help of machines, she would live, probably breathing. The only help she needed was nutritional supplementation by the hospital staffs and nurses, which were willing to do that. They were doing it for the past 3-4 decades, so they were willing to do it in the future as well. So technically, but not exactly, this mercy killing of Aruna Shanbaug would have fallen a lot more into the category of active euthanasia, which, by the way, is a lot more serious than passive euthanasia and is even considered criminal homicide in certain countries. So, considering Aruna's condition, she couldn't be killed by passive euthanasia, and the Supreme Court did not really want to approve active euthanasia. But there was another factor at play here: the KEM nurses. See, these nurses were helping Aruna Shanbaug to survive for the past 4 decades, and they were grown quite attached to her. See, after the attack, when it happened in 1973, these KEM nurses went on to a strike, went on to a protest, demanding for better working conditions, not only for themselves, but also improved living conditions for Aruna Shanbaug. I guess history does repeat itself. Later in 1980s, once the BMC also decided to move Aruna Shanbaug from one hospital to the other to free up the space, but they again came out and protested and stopped that from happening. This is the level of closeness these KM nurses had with Aruna. Not only the nurses, even the staff there. And this degree of dedication did pay off. See, during the judgment, the Supreme Court did not give the recognition of the next friend or the locus standi to Pinky Virani. They did acknowledge how much hard work she had done as a social right activist and how much she had tried to help Aruna Shanbaug, but they just told that she did not have the locus standi in this case. Now, these two entitlements that I just said are very important. See, the next friend just makes you a proxy for the victim or the main person. Just it allows you to take decisions on the behalf of the person in question if he or she is not able to do. Now, locus standi, even though it does the same thing, it does it a little differently. It basically tells you that do you have enough standing in that case to decide for Aruna. You see what I did there? So, recognizing the hospital staff as the next friend and giving them the locus standi, and obviously their decision was to keep Aruna Shanbaug alive, they rejected the plea and allowed Aruna Shanbaug to live. Obviously, this decision was celebrated by the hospital authorities and everybody loved what the Supreme Court decided. But that was not all. Even though the court had declined this mercy killing of Aruna Shanbaug, but they did recognize that the country needed proper guidelines for such euthanasia cases in future. And eventually, on 7th of March 2018, Supreme Court formally legalized passive euthanasia in our country and created certain guidelines. By that, we joined very few handful of countries like Belgium, Canada, Netherlands, Spain, and few more that also have legalized mercy killing. in her final days, Aruna Shanbaug was fed through her nose. Eventually, she contracted pneumonia and was admitted to the ICU. But finally, Aruna, who had fought for survival after that gruesome for over 42 years with the help of KEM nurses, eventually succumbed to pneumonia. And on 18th May 2015, she was relieved of her mortal existence. There was some controversy relating to her funeral rites because the relatives who had nothing to do with her for so many years suddenly popped up and wanted to do those funeral rites. But eventually, obviously, the court sided with the hospital staff and they were the ones who did her funeral rites rightfully. But depending on which side you are on, Pinky Virani or hospital staff, your opinions can differ and you have all the rights having different opinions, but you should do your own research. Like on one side, Pinky Virani, who thought that Aruna Shanbaug's condition was deteriorating. She, was virtually a dead person. Her teeth had decayed, which were causing her immense pain. The food was completely mashed and was given in semi-solid form. She choked on liquids. But on the other hand, the KEM staff, as previously mentioned, thought Aruna Shanbaug was a part of their family. She accepted food in normal course and responded by facial expression and also commands intermittently by making sounds. Many people came in support of euthanasia for Aruna, and many plays were written, many novels were written about her. But eventually, what's a fact here is Aruna Shanbaug lied in persistent vegetative state for over 42 grueling years, in which she had survived not only by her dedication and will to live, but also with a major role to play by the hospital nurses and the staff. During this period, her parents had died. Her relatives had nothing to do with her. They were the ones who stood by her all this time. But in all fairness, I think, she lied in that state for over 4 decades. And neither you nor me could ever imagine or feel what she would have felt for those 40 years, even if she was feeling anything or not. But at the end, she gave our country, our legal system, one of the most important guidelines regarding euthanasia, which surely would help any unfortunate Aruna in the future, which I do not want to happen. Finally, this was the case of Aruna Shanbaug, and it took a lot of time to do it. We learned a lot of things about unconsciousness states, euthanasia, and definitely the sad recurring episodes that are happening in our country over and over again. But at the end, I want you guys not only to introspect about what you learned from this video, but also do your own research regarding this topic. That's the most important part. You can't just go off of what I said. So if you want your own opinion, you should research yourself as well and then build your own opinion. Then in the comments below, tell me what you really think should have happened in this case. And also let me know if you like this type of case study or not. Maybe I'd do a few more in the future. Till then, I'll take the leave and meet you in the next one. Stay safe, bye-bye, and stay happy.